Okay, happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm meteorologist David Paul. This is the KHOU 11 Weather Center here in Houston, Texas. This is your Atlantic Tropical Update for Tuesday evening, October the 12th. So we've got one tropical wave in the Atlantic. That's the only situation going on that could possibly threaten anything in the Atlantic Basin right now. We'll look at that one. And then we've got Tropical Storm Pamela in the Pacific. If you remember yesterday, Pamela was forecast to become Cat 2, maybe Cat 3. That has changed. We'll take a close look at how Pamela is going to impact Mexico and Texas and a big swath of North America with rain. And we'll also take a look at the upcoming weather pattern and the snowfall that's forecast for North America as well. First of all, I had a couple of questions about the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon. So as we look down at the Northern Hemisphere, the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon is simple. It's just the name. It's the same thing, an intense area of tropical low pressure over the warm waters of an ocean, in this case the Pacific. And in the eastern Pacific, and by eastern I mean east of the international date line. So there's Hawaii, just to set your bearing. So anything east of the international date line, Northern Hemisphere, is called a hurricane. So that's why even though we get storms and Pamela forming here in the eastern Pacific, it is called a hurricane. If you get west of that international date line, they're then called typhoons, but they're exactly the same thing. Intense areas of tropical low pressure that we call hurricanes closer to the U.S., and they call typhoons closer to Asia. Okay. Names so far in the Atlantic Basin, we've had 20 of them. We have not ended the list yet. Wanda is still on there, and at the moment, we don't see Wanda forming in the Atlantic Basin anytime soon. If we did get Wanda and then had another storm, we would no longer go to the Greek alphabet. We have a supplemental list of tropical names. Adria, Braylon, Caridad are the first three names on that list. We'll have to wait and see if we end up getting there. We still have a chunk of October and at least into the early part of November. Statistically, we can get a few storms, and then after that, it really drops off. And right now, there's not a whole lot threatening the Atlantic Basin. The Gulf of Mexico is as quiet as a mouse. And let me tell you, every weather person and person that lives along the Gulf Coast right now is breathing a sigh of relief that at least for the moment, nothing's threatening us. And the open water of the Caribbean Sea is also quiet as well, with nothing forecast to develop there. This spot is now north of the island of Hispaniola. It's technically in the Atlantic Ocean, and it only has a 10% chance for development. And as you can see, what there is of this is forecast to be turned off to the east. If you've been watching my updates, you know why it's turning to the east, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The rest of the Atlantic Basin, it's quiet. We've got a little wave out here showing no signs of development. Old frontal boundary out here, nothing developing along that. We do have a broad area of low pressure east of Halifax and St. John's, Newfoundland, but that's nothing tropical. So for the moment, the rest of the Atlantic Basin is quiet. In the East Pacific, we've got now Tropical Storm Pamela, which may still become a hurricane before making landfall into early Wednesday morning. So late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning, this can make landfall and then rapidly move up into Texas and across Mexico, and we'll go over the impacts from Pamela in detail here in just a moment. Quickly, this wave out over the open Atlantic, which is centered about here, if there is a center to it, you can see these are surface streamline winds, and it's just a wave right now. We don't see any type of closed circulation, nothing coming out of the west, just an open wave, and I think it will struggle to stay as an open wave. As you guessed it, at the upper levels, we go to 250 millibars. These are winds at about 30,000 feet. There's a whole lot of wind shear. Those are winds cutting across the top of this system as it tries to develop. And because of that, the whole thing is lopsided and sort of shaped like a shrimp. There's the head of the shrimp. There's the tail of the shrimp. You see a system that looks like a shrimp, and it's one that's struggling to get organized at all. So at the moment in that environment, nothing is going to develop rapidly, if at all. We look at the computer models and pay closer attention to the red isobars, the European model. It does try to pick up on a weak area of low pressure forming out here. But even so, remember, we've got all this wind shear out here. We've got that upper level low out here. And so that's going to want to push it off to the east and away from land. And so as we run the model out in time, and it's interesting, both the GFS and the Euro do pick up on a broad, weak area of low pressure forming out here. But watch as we go forward in time, as what there is of this struggles to remain an identifiable system, and the Euro holds on to it, but it's a weak area of low pressure being absorbed by a much broader area of low pressure. These are the Azores. So the Azores may get some wind and rain as we head into the end of this coming weekend. This is Sunday, but it doesn't look like a significant system to impact the Azores in any significant way other than some enhanced wind, rain, and seas out over the eastern Atlantic. So that's where the Atlantic Basin stands right now. This is Pamela, who last night, the Hurricane Center was forecasting this to become a major hurricane. It would be the third major hurricane of the Eastern Pacific hurricane season for 2021, if it could become a major hurricane. But instead of rapidly intensifying into a major, it has weakened back down to just a tropical storm, winds at 70 miles an hour. That's the same score it was yesterday at this time. It intensified, now it's weakened back down to a tropical storm, moving northeast at 9, pressures at 989 millibars. That's up from 24 hours ago. So what's going on? And you can see it's lopsided. If we just kind of draw a line, here's the center. All the action is off to the east side of the center. To the west side, it's very, very dry. It looks like it's pulling in a little dry air, but what's really happening is all at the upper levels, this has encountered that wind shear that we mentioned last night that was up here to the north. We thought it might duck underneath that wind shear, but up here at 250 millibars, the winds are racing out of the west. And they're ripping the storm apart. They're weakening it. So this is good news for Mazatlan and the Pacific coast of Mexico as far as a hurricane threat goes. It looks like maybe just a minimal hurricane, if at all, maybe still just staying a tropical storm as it makes landfall in the wee hours of Wednesday morning. So just at about, maybe 8 hours or so. Once again, wind shear tears apart developing systems. To get a hurricane to get going and rapidly intensify, it's got to be stacked vertically, straight up and down. So you got your inflow at the surface. These are surface-based systems. Grabs that heat energy off the ocean surface, brings it up through the engine of the storm, releases its heat content, and then exhausts out the top. And that's all got to be done in a vertically stacked system to get intensification. But in this case, as we just saw, those upper level winds cutting across from west to east, not only tilting the storm over, but can also at times rip storms completely apart. It hasn't ripped Pamela completely apart, but it has weakened it significantly. So that's good news as far as a hurricane threat goes for the Pacific coast. And here's the forecast track from the Hurricane Center. Set your bearings. Here's Cabo San Lucas, Mazatlan. These are hurricane warnings up for Mazatlan. And this happens tonight. Going into the wee hours of Wednesday morning, maybe just before sunrise, the storm will make landfall here near Mazatlan, Pacific coast of Mexico, and then race inland. By Wednesday afternoon, it's now almost into central Mexico. Now, there are a whole lot of mountains. It's the Rocky Mountains, Southern Occidentals, that reach into Mexico, and those mountains will reach up and wring out a tremendous amount of moisture with this. So not only is it going to be a flood threat for western and central Mexico, but it will also eventually be a flash flooding threat for central Texas as the moisture gets in there going into Wednesday night and Thursday afternoon. So here are rainfall potential totals over the next several days. And all this rain is going to happen in the next 24, 36 hours for the Mazatlan area. Again, here's Cabo San Lucas, there's Mazatlan, La Cruz, and these mountains right in here. You can easily see 3 to 5, 5 to 7 in mountainous terrain. You get it quickly running down, focusing in some of those little channels, those little mountain valleys. Flash flood threat is significant here for the southwestern portion of Mexico. As we head further out in time, we do expect that this will continue to create a flash flooding threat across a big chunk of central Mexico, but it should be moving quick enough so that I'm hoping, we're cautiously optimistic that this is not going to create a huge problem for central Mexico, but as it gets into Texas, it's going to be interacting with an approaching frontal boundary. So easy, Del Rio to San Antonio, Austin, back to Brownwood to Waco, could easily see 3 to 7 inches in some spots, and that will create a flash flood threat. Again, this is going into Wednesday and Thursday for central Texas. But these tropical systems, notorious heavy rainmakers, can have wide-reaching impacts. And look at this. So here's the path that moisture is going to take all the way up into Quebec, Canada. There will be a significant rain threat. So Tulsa, Oklahoma, East Oklahoma, going into Thursday night, you could see heavy rain. That's getting into the 1 to 3 inch range for Tulsa and eastern Oklahoma. Also up into the Ozarks, getting into northwest portions of Arkansas. You know, those Ozarks, those mountains reach up, they'll wring out some of that moisture as well. So it will be a flash flooding threat. Southern Missouri as well, portions of the Ozark Mountains there. And then a wide swath through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio of 1 to maybe 2 inches of rain in here. That comes down quickly, could be a flash flooding threat. Toronto, Canada, a couple of inches of rain possible. Look at the heavier totals here, 1 to 3 inches possible west of Quebec and eastern Canada. So wide-ranging impacts from this tropical storm now in the East Pacific all the way across Mexico, across the central and northern eastern U.S., all the way up into Canada. Here's the setup at the upper levels, and you can kind of see everything here. So here is Pamela and the moisture associated with that right now. We've got our dip in the jet stream. Again, these are the wind flow up at 34,000 feet, the jet stream. That trough allowing for our first significant snowstorm in the Rockies. That's going on right now. Denver may see some snow. Most of it's going to be in the foothills and the higher elevations of Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. Utah also getting some significant snow. They may see a couple of feet in some of the higher peaks here over the next 24, 36 hours. Been snowing there most of the day. Got a pretty good jet streak coming in off the Pacific coast, so it's a messy evening in Portland, all the way up to Vancouver and British Columbia, getting snow all the way down to sea level in portions there, and it's windy and it's cold. Here's where we stand right now with the setup. We'll go forward in time. That little snowmaker races off into central Canada, and as we get into the weekend, we do have a trough near the Great Lakes, but a lot of the moisture is wrung out. So this is actually going to set up a very pleasant weekend for most of the lower 48. Not so pleasant up here near Vancouver as the jet stream brings in more wind and rain. And a little bit of wind and rain up across the eastern Great Lakes, but not a whole lot. So the weekend looks very fall-like across the U.S. and very, very settled. But I want you to notice this. So we've got the northern branch of the jet. Look at the southern branch of the jet. So going into the end of the weekend and early next week, so this is a split jet pattern. Clearly see the northern branch, clearly see the southern branch. And this type of jet alignment, this split jet pattern, is a notorious wet weather pattern for the southern United States. And look what happens as we head into Tuesday. We go into Wednesday, the 20th of October. Look at the rain that sets up once again across Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, even into New Mexico. So the middle of next week, that split jet with the southern branch being so active, it will be wet across the southern plains again. A little bit of rain and snow across the northern Great Lakes. Look at the big ridge that develops into western Canada. That's a warm-up for you guys. It's a warm-up for western Canada and the Rockies next week, but not before you guys get some significant snow. So here's the way the snow forecast goes now through Tuesday the 19th, and it's a nice snow for the northern half of the Rockies in the USA. And in Canada, look at all the snow that's forecast here. So this is going to lay down the first significant snowpack of the season for the central and western half of Canada, up into the Klondike, up into Alaska as well. And this is something that I here in Houston pay very close attention to. Why would I care about snow cover in Alaska, Canada, and the northwestern U.S.? It is because I am a huge fan of cold weather. Here in little old Houston, we sweat enough. We like it when it gets cold. And if we're going to have a cold air outbreak here in Houston, it almost always begins with a cold air mass coming across out of Siberia and into northwest Canada and Alaska. And if you've got snow cover, that cold air stays refrigerated and it has a better chance of staying cold as it heads south, and if the weather pattern is right, gets released down into the central and southern plains. That's not in the forecast right now. That's just something I keep an eye on because I do like a cold weather snap here in Houston every now and then. Questions, comments, I read them. Thank you for leaving them. Hit me up on social as well. That's where we stand tonight in the tropics and across North America and Canada with the weather pattern going on right now and the Eastern Pacific. We'll see you tomorrow for another update.